Hey everybody! So in this video, what we're going to be doing is completing the square on the standard form of a quadratic equation. And that's going to yield a very useful formula. So we know that the very first step of completing the square is to move the constant term. So if you'll notice, what I'm doing here is I am subtracting c from both sides. So that's going to leave me with ax squared plus bx equals negative c. So that is our first step of completing the square. Step 2 is you divide every term by the leading coefficient. So I'll go through here and I'll divide every term by a. This is going to leave me with x squared plus b over ax equals negative c over a. So, not too bad right here. The next part is going to get kind of complicated because there's about 3 steps in the next part. So we know what we have to do is take this middle term, b over a, and we're going to have to half it. We're going to have it. So dividing something by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. So here, this would be b over 2a. So this is the first step. So we know we take the middle term, we half it, and we square it. So be careful when you square this. So remember that when you square, you just multiply it by itself. So b over 2a times b over 2a gives you b squared over 4a squared. So we're going to take this value and we're going to add it to both sides. So I'll write it here, b squared over 4a squared, and then I'll do it to the right-hand side and say b squared over 4a squared. So now that we have this, what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this just below. So down here, we're going to say x squared plus b over ax plus b squared over 4a squared equals, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this b squared to the front, only because you know that when you write something in standard form, normally it's the highest exponent first. So I'll just say b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try to subtract these two on the right. Well, in order to subtract, we know that we have to have common denominators. So c over a, we're looking at the denominator a, and we need to say, okay, what do we need to multiply by in order to make it look like 4a squared? And that is 4a. So remember, if you do it to the bottom, you have to do it to the top. So now I have b squared over 4a squared minus 4a times c is 4ac, and then 4a times a gives us 4a squared. Now we have common denominators, and what we're going to do is write this as one fraction. So we'll say b squared minus 4ac, and we'll put it all over 4a squared. Now we're ready to bring down our left-hand side. So we'll say x squared plus b over ax plus b squared over 4a squared. Now what we're going to try to do is solve by the square root method, which is the last few steps of completing the square. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to factor this on the bottom. And now we think, okay, that looks monstrous to factor, because it's like, what in the world multiplies to give you b squared over 4a squared and adds to give you 1/2? Well, we've already done that, and that's right here, b over 2a. Because b over 2a times b over 2a is b squared over 4a squared. And then if you add them, you get 2b over 2a. So the 2's would cancel, and that would leave you with b over a. So these are going to be our factors for this quadratic on the left. So we'll come right down here and we'll set up our parentheses. And we'll say, okay, the first binomial will be x plus b over 2a. And so we'll rewrite this again and say x plus b over 2a This will equal b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. So I wrote the left out in expanded form so that it makes a little bit more sense when I rewrite it, because since we have the same binomial times itself, we could just rewrite this to say x plus b over 2a quantity squared. And so we'll bring down the b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. All right, and then the last few steps of solving with completing the square is to take the square root here. So we're going to need to take the square root of what's on the left and the square root of what is on the right. So on the left, the squared is now simplified, so we just have x plus b over 2a. And remember, when you're taking the square root of a fraction, you have to take the square root of the numerator and you have to take the square root of the denominator. So I'll say the square root of 4a squared. So now looking at the numerator, we want to determine, is this something you could take the square root of? Could I take the square root of b squared minus 4ac? So are there two terms that are exactly alike that look like this? And that answer is no. So we're going to leave it as plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And we'll go ahead and draw our line here. And then in the denominator, 4a squared, that is a perfect square monomial because I can take the square root of 4 and the square root of a squared. And that leaves me with 2a. So now we're almost done. The very last step here would be to subtract b over 2a. So if I subtract it from the left, I need to go ahead and subtract it from the right as well. Now I have x equals negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Starting to look mighty familiar, isn't it? Now, since my denominators are the same, I could rewrite this as one fraction. So I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. When we complete the square with the standard form of a quadratic, it yields the quadratic formula. Yay! All right, that is all for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it helpful, then go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. All right, we'll see you all in the next video.